I have spent my life among the stars. I have seen the ruins of 1,000 dead civilizations, the shattered husks of forgotten empires drifting through the void like silent tombstones. I have walked upon worlds where the air itself is poison, where the bones of the long-extinct crunch underfoot like brittle glass. I have witnessed the arrogance of species that once thought themselves gods, now reduced to little more than dust. And yet, in all my years, in all the horrors I have faced, nothing has terrified me as much as what I found in the silent expanse. It started with a signal, faint, distorted, almost a whisper in the dark. The pale Requiem, my ship, had been patrolling the borders of human space when we intercepted it. It was old, and possibly old, its frequency warped by centuries of decay. The linguists on board tried to decode it, but there was something wrong with the transmission. It wasn't just a message, it was alive. A pulse, a rhythm, something that twisted through the data like a parasite burrowing into flesh. The first to go mad was Lieutenant Holloway. She had been analyzing the signal for days when she started whispering in her sleep, repeating strange words in a language none of us recognized. When we found her in the mess hall, she had carved symbols into her arms with a piece of shattered plating, eyes wide, lips torn from silent screams. "They're coming," she said before she tore out her own throat. That was when we knew this was no ordinary transmission. It was something else. Something watching. We should have left. We should have burned every trace of that signal and turned our ship back toward home. But curiosity is a disease, and I was its most willing host. We traced the signal to its source, a dead system, one not marked on any stellar maps. No planets, no moons, just a cold, lightless void where something unnatural lingered. As we approached, our sensors failed, our comms filled with whispers and static, and the temperature aboard the ship began to drop. And then we saw it. A structure, massive beyond comprehension, drifting silently in the abyss. It was ancient, its surface scarred by the passing of eons, its architecture wrong, impossible angles, shifting geometries that made the mind recoil. It was not built by human hands. It was not built by anything we had ever known. And it was waiting for us. We hesitated, but hesitation was meaningless. The moment we saw it, we had already been claimed. We should have turned back, burned our engines to full power and fled to the safety of human space. But the abyss does not let go so easily. The closer we got to the structure, the more reality itself seemed to unravel. The pale Requiem's artificial gravity fluctuated without cause, the walls groaned as if something massive were pressing against them from the outside, and the lights flickered in patterns that almost seemed deliberate, like something was trying to speak to us. The whispers in the comms grew louder, shifting from static-laden echoes into something disturbingly familiar. They spoke in our voices. At first, it was fragments of conversations we had never had, distorted phrases calling to us in the dead of night. But then, it became more. I heard my own voice calling for help in the cargo bay. Commander Idris swore she heard her mother's lullaby drifting through the corridors. And Engineer Vasquez, he saw something. Something in the reflections. He screamed as he shattered every mirror on the ship, muttering about figures standing just behind him. And yet, despite every warning, we pressed forward. We launched a drone toward the structure first, watching through its feed as it neared the impossible surface. At a distance, it looked metallic, but up close, it was something else. The drone's scanners failed to identify the material. It was neither solid nor liquid, either dead nor alive. It shifted in ways that defied logic, pulsing as if the entire construct was a single, breathing entity. Then the drone stopped. Not because of any external force, no energy fields, no interference. It simply froze in place, its transmission turning to a deafening, rhythmic thud, like the sound of a massive heartbeat. And then, the feed changed. For the briefest moment, an image flickered across our monitors, a mass of twisting, elongated bodies, fused together, their hollow eyes staring at us through the screen. They did not move. They did not breathe. They simply watched. And then, the drone was gone. No explosion. No malfunction. One frame, it was there. The next, nothing. We were all staring at the blank screen when the ship lurched. The pale requiem had been pulled forward, drawn toward the structure by a force we could not see. The engines roared, but it was useless. We were in the grip of something far older and far worse than gravity. Panic spread through the crew like wildfire. Idris tried to send a distress signal, but the moment she activated the transmitter, her console burned, not exploded, not overloaded. It melted. Like it had been touched by something beyond heat, beyond physics. We were already dead. We just hadn't realized it yet. The last thing I remember before we crossed the event horizon of that monolithic nightmare was the sound of breathing. Not ours. Not through our comms. But from inside the ship. The pale requiem shuddered as we passed through the unseen barrier surrounding the structure. For the briefest moment, I felt something slither through me, a presence, cold and impossibly vast, brushing against the edges of my mind. Then silence. The ship was no longer moving. No pull. No resistance. Just stillness, like we had been plucked from space and placed somewhere else. Our external cameras showed only darkness. No stars. No structure. Just an endless, crushing void. Then, the lights flickered back on. We were inside. The thing we had thought was a station, or a derelict, was no mere construct. It was a vessel, a tomb that had waited in the abyss for longer than our species had existed. And now, it had claimed us. The halls were impossibly vast, stretching beyond the reach of our floodlights. The architecture twisted in ways that made my head throb, corridors spiraling into themselves, doorways leading to nowhere, vast chambers filled with machinery that pulsed like exposed organs. The walls were not metal but something else, something that shifted when you weren't looking. And then, the voices returned. Not whispers this time. Screams. They echoed from the corridors ahead, raw and endless, filled with suffering no throat should be able to endure. And beneath them, a sound that made my blood freeze, footsteps. Something else was here. We moved in formation, weapons raised, though we all knew they would be useless against whatever had built this place. Idris led the way, her knuckles white against her rifle. Vasquez wouldn't stop muttering prayers under his breath. And I felt something watching me. Not ahead. Not from the shadows. From inside my own mind. We found them in a chamber lined with massive black obelisks, figures twisted beyond recognition, their bodies fused to the walls, their mouths stretched in silent screams. They had no eyes. No features left to mark them as the species they once were. But I recognized their uniforms. Human. They had come before us. And they had been claimed. Then the lights went out. I don't remember how long we were lost in the dark. I only remember the feeling of movement, something brushing against my skin, cold and wet, fingers or tendrils or something that had never known flesh. One by one, the screams of my crew were cut off. Sudden. Final. And then silence. I awoke alone. I was back on the pale requiem, but the ship was wrong. The corridors stretched endlessly. My own footsteps echoed back at me, but the delay was off. Like someone else was walking just a fraction behind. I tried to send a distress signal, but my voice wasn't mine anymore. It came back through the speakers before I spoke. And in the reflection of the console's screen, I saw them. Standing behind me. Watching. Waiting. I do not know how long I have been here. The ship no longer obeys the laws of time or space. Sometimes I hear the voices of my crew, calling to me from the vents. Sometimes I see Idris standing at the edge of my vision, but when I turn, she is gone. But the worst part is the signal. The same one that led us here. It's still broadcasting. Not a distress call. Not a warning. An invitation. And someone, somewhere, will hear it. Just like we did. Just like we always do.